Welcome to the Worldshapers, conversations with authors about their latest books. I'm your host, Edward Willett, and this episode's guest, Lynda Monahan, talking about her latest collection of poetry, The Door at the End of Everything. Hello and welcome to another episode of The Worldshapers, the podcast where I talk to other authors about their latest books. My name is Edward Willett. I am myself an author of science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction for readers of all ages. My most recent novel is The Tangled Stars, which is a far future outer space adventure featuring an AI-uplifted talking cat who becomes a starship captain. It's also a heist novel, and it came out from DAW Books in 2022 in ebook and audiobook. I hope you will check that out, The Tangled Stars. I'm also a publisher. My publishing company is called Shadowpaw Press, and as I always like to do at the start of these things, I just want to mention the most recent books from Shadowpaw Press. We'll begin with this one. This is the most recent one as of today. Let Us Be True by Erna Buffy. This is a reprint of a book that originally came out from Kato Books in 2015. Was shortlisted for a couple of awards at the Manitoba Book Awards that year. It's a literary novel about family secrets, and it's by a Winnipeg author, Erna Buffy. Find that one. Let Us Be True. Another recent one that I have to mention because it's my biggest, most recent release is this one, The Downloaded by Hugo and Nebula award-winning author Robert J. Sawyer. It's his 25th science fiction novel. Rob is, of course, Canada's best-known science fiction author, and this book started as an audio book original with Audible, starring Brendan Fraser in the cast, among others. So I highly recommend The Downloaded. I publish young people's books as well, and the most recent ones there is this trilogy by Arthur Slade, who's a Saskatchewan author. Can I hold that where I can sort of show them all? Yeah, kind of. Not really. Not very well. There we go. We have... whoops, that's the third one. Let's start at the other end. There we go. We have Gredstone Ghosts, Return of the Gredstone Ghosts, which is a ghost story set in Moose Jaw. We have Ghost Hotel, which is a ghost story set at the Bessborough in Saskatoon, the Bessborough Hotel. And then we have Invasion of the IQ Snatchers, which is a science fiction story set in Nanaimo. You can see the Nanaimo bar on the cover. And these covers are great. They are by Saskatoon artist Elaine M. Wills. So very, very happy with those. Those are out now as well. Those are middle grade books. And again, they were originally published by Kato Books. I've picked up several of the Kato Books titles over the years. And then the other one, because they unfortunately went bankrupt not that long ago, and they were one of my publishers too. So I was looking for a new home for mine. And sure enough, there were some other people who were looking for new homes for their work as well. And then I want to mention this one, Shapers of Worlds Volume 4. This is the fourth anthology that I have kickstarted featuring authors who were guests of this podcast. Probably headlining this one, I guess, would be Sherry Lynn Kenyon, New York Times bestselling author, but there's many other bestsellers and award winners in that collection. And it's illustrated by a Calgary artist, Wendy Nordell. Shapers of Worlds Volume 5 is in the works now. I have almost all the stories in, and artwork is already being created. I have to do a lot of editing yet. That book will be out to backers of the Kickstarter this fall, and then you'll see it in stores early next year. The other thing that I don't have a copy of in front of me right now was The Trader's Son, the other book that I recently published, The Trader's Son by Dave Duncan, the late, great Canadian science fiction and fantasy author Dave Duncan. The Trader's Son came out at the same time as The Downloaded, and it's edited by Dr. Robert Runte, who is Dave's long-term editor. And I'll be talking to Dr. Runte here on this podcast in the very near future. I've also published I'm about to publish a second book by Dave Duncan. The last novel he wrote, it's a fantasy novel called Corridor to Nightmare, and Rob Runte and I will be launching that at When Words Collide in Calgary the weekend of August 16th to 18th. So if you happen to be going to that event, be sure to check out the book launch for Corridor to Nightmare. All right, well, that's a lot of talking about me, so now let's move on to today's guest, who's also a Shadowpaw Press author, Lynda Monahan. So let me tell you about Lynda. She's my first poet on the show. Lynda is also the author of 4 other collections of poetry, A Slow Dance in the Flames, What My Body Knows, Verge, and a co-written collection, A Beautiful Stone, Poems and ululations. She facilitates a number of creative writing workshops and has been writer in residence at St. Peter's College, facilitated retreat, Balfour Collegiate in Regina, and the Prince Albert Public Library, and writer on the wards at Victoria Hospital in Prince Albert. She is editor of several books, including Second Chances, Stories of Brain Injury Survivors, Skating in the Exit Light, a poetry anthology, and With Just One Reach of Hands, an anthology of the writing of the Canadian Mental Health Association's Writing for Your Life group, which she also facilitates. She has served on the council of the League of Canadian Poets, the Sage Hill Writing Experience, and the Saskatchewan Writers Guild. She recently completed a year as lead artist for an Artists in Communities project through the Sask Arts Board, mentoring local artists to develop long-term community arts programming. So let's talk to Lynda now. So Lynda, welcome to the Worldshapers.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is episode 181, I think, and you are my first poet, or at least the first person whose poetry book we're going to be talking about. I'm sure there have been many other authors who have written some poetry, but this is the first time I focused on a poetry book.
Well, it's an honor.
And of course, I always look for connections. We have a couple. Years ago, we served on the Saskatchewan Writers Guild board together. That was a long time ago now.
A few years back.
For an interesting period. And now we are in a publisher-author relationship because I'm publishing your new book, The Door at the End of Everything, through my Shadow Pop Press. So, and very excited to have it as well.
And I'm excited to see the book coming out. Yeah, getting closer.
Yeah, very soon now. Yeah, it'll come out very, very shortly after this goes live, I think. So now let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. I always get that line from The Sound of Music in my head when I say that. Tell me about yourself and where you grew up and how you got interested in writing and writing poetry.
Well, I think I've always had an interest in writing. I don't really remember a time when I didn't write. Even as a child, I was always scribbling something down. And I live in the Nesbitt Forest outside of Prince Albert, on the Shellbrook Highway by the Shell River. And my favorite place to be is living in the forest. I spend my summers at Waskesiu. We ping pong back and forth between Waskesiu and home all summer long. I've taught creative writing for a number of years, doing various workshops for the Saskatchewan Writers Guild and the League of Canadian Poets. So writing has always been a huge part of my life. I don't see it as separate from me or something I do. Is sort of who I am as well. So very excited to see my fifth book coming out.
Well, when did you start getting published?
Let's see, I probably in my early to late 20s, in my 20s somewhere, I think I saw my first poems published. And I really, really got interested in poetry when I took a creative writing course from Lorna Crozier many years ago at the U of S. And Lorna really lit a fire under me for writing. She made me realize that me, ordinary Lynda Monahan, who lives in the forest near Prince Albert, had a story worth telling. And so she really made me believe in myself as a poet. And so I think that was what really got me going. Yeah, and attending Sage Hill Writing Experience and, places like that, getting help through the Writers Guild.
I was going to ask if you'd had any formal workshops and that sort of thing, and clearly that has been a big part of your journey. Absolutely. Did you start writing like a lot of us obviously start writing when we're very young as kids? Did you write poetry as a teenager, and did you show it to people?
Well, I showed it to my family, who always thought it was very good, no matter how bad it was. So, yeah, I did share my writing, and it wasn't just poetry back then. I wrote stories, and I was always writing something. Yeah, tried my hand at songwriting, done a bit of that too.
And are you still writing longer form work, like short stories and that sort of thing as well?
Occasionally I do. I dabble a little bit in writing creative nonfiction and fiction, but I do feel that my real strength is poetry, that's where I think my writing can shine is through poetry. And it's my best way of expressing myself. I always felt poetry was my best venue for saying what I wanted to say. I could get across clearly what I wanted to say. I love the economy of words that poetry allows for.
Now, for much of this podcast's existence, I have focused on the writing process, but it's always of novelists. And so, I always ask the same sorts of questions, like where do the ideas come from? How much planning do you do? Outlining? Well, outlining doesn't really come into it in poetry. But I think the original idea of what the seeds are of your poems, what are the sorts of things that will strike you that you feel you need to express in poetry?
I draw from my life largely, the place I live, the people in my life. When I'm going through a difficult time, poetry helps me to understand what I'm feeling. So mostly from my life and my experiences is what I write about. And even though my work can be often very personal, my hope is that it would be universal as well, because I think often the very specific, very personal can be universal. I don't think we're all very different from each other in that way.
What does your process of creating a poem look like? You write in a notebook somewhere? Or are you typing? Or
I was a friend of John V. Hicks. He was Prince Albert's honorary writer in residence and a very well-known Canadian poet. And Jack used to tell me that he would write on lined yellow paper, that his first drafts had to be on lined yellow paper, and then he would type. I mean, that was pre-internet and pre-computers, and he would type up his poems on his typewriter. And so that kind of rubbed off on me, and I still write my early drafts by hand, often on lined yellow paper, but I don't put my work onto my computer until I feel that it's finished. I like to write by hand. I like that connection because I'm very left-handed, hopelessly left-handed. I like that connection between my heart and my left hand and the page. Somehow that's what works for me. Yeah, it's a bit of an old-fashioned way to do things, but it works. So, and I don't write every day by any means. I write when I feel drawn to it, when something is happening or something I experience or see needs to be expressed. That's when I can really get going. And I love sequences. I love to work on sequences of poems because then you get to say so much more in a series of shorter poems. I like working on sequences.
So what does your revision process look like once you have written that first version of it, then you go back and work on it? What are the sorts of things that you are looking at when you go back to improve your initial draft?
That's when I really do the fine tuning. I get rid of words that I think I don't need. I look for the perfect way to say something. It's like, to me, shaping this tiny perfect thing, and it has to be polished. And so I spend a lot of time, sometimes a very long time, refining my work and making the best it can be. And even sometimes still, when I read some of my early poems in my first books, I change them when I'm reading them a little bit because I'm still revising. But eventually I try to finish revising and decide it's the best it can be, even though I still look at it. Yeah.
I've done that.
Yeah.
I've done that with prose and readings. You come across an infelicitous phrase and you think, oh, I don't want to read that out loud. I'm going to just tweak that a little bit.
I'm going to change that. Absolutely. Yeah. I think all writers.
Yeah, there's an old saying that the best way to find typos is to read your work out loud to an audience.
It's not true. Yeah, wherever you stumble. Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about this book specifically. It's called The Door at the End of Everything. How did it come about?
The door at the end of everything has a very specific meaning. For a couple of years, I worked as writer in residence at the Victoria Hospital here in Prince Albert. And I worked on all of the wards. I worked on the palliative wards and medical wards. And there are two seniors care facilities attached to the hospital, and I also worked in those facilities as well, writing with the patients and the residents there. But I ended up, over the period of time, spending a lot of my time working with the patients on the mental health ward in the hospital, because a lot of those people sat there all day long staring at the wall or didn't have much company, and they so wanted to share their stories. And the door at the end of everything refers to the mental health ward is in the basement of the hospital, and there's a long tunnel, a long hallway that goes down to a locked door, which is the entrance to the mental health ward. So to me, the door at the end of everything means when everything falls apart and you just can't cope anymore, there's that door at the end of everything. So that's what it meant to me. And I really enjoyed working on the mental health wards, getting to know people and hearing their stories. And I was so struck by not only how much suffering there was, but how much hope and how much courage they displayed too. So when I took my coffee breaks, I would go to the cafeteria and I would just write. I had such strong responses to them. I felt so invested in what I was doing that I needed to write about it. And at the same time, for the past 13 years now, I facilitate a Writing for Your Life group with the Canadian Mental Health Association here in Prince Albert. So I work every second week. I have a writing group down at the Nest, which is a drop-in center here in Prince Albert. And the participants do exactly what we say. We write, it's called Writing for Your Life, and that's what we do. We write for our lives. And so again, I just became so involved with working with people, helping them tell their stories and sharing giving them a voice. I felt in many ways like I've been able to give them a voice. It's something I think in all of my writing career, maybe it's what I'm most proud of, is that this has come about. And so I needed to be able to write for myself these experiences. And I don't at all feel like I'm writing from the outside like an observer, because I've had my own issues. Everybody does, right? I think mental health is something all of us have to cope with it at one time or another. And so using my own experiences and my work as writer on the wards and working with the Writing for Your Life group, all of these poems came about and from my own life, all of these poems came about. And so the first two sections of The Door at the End of Everything, as you know, Ed, deal with a lot of the pain and suffering of living with mental illness, about being marginalized, because people with mental health issues are often on the periphery of society, often street people for sure. But I also want to show the courage and hope and bravery and loveliness of so many of the people I've met. And the last section of the book talks about that. So though I write down into the darkness and write into all the troubles, I also, was very important to me, always is, to write up towards hope, to go into the darkness, but at the same time to reach for the light. And there is so much light and so much hope for people living with severe mental health problems. So that's kind of what happened.
Did you know as you were writing these poems that you were heading toward a book? Because they were, many of them were published in like journals and magazines, weren't they?
I think I did. Yeah, I think I realized as it grew, as the collection grew, that this might be. I wasn't sure what shape it would take at all, because I didn't want it to be just darkness. I didn't want that. It was important to me to show the spirit of so many of these people. So yeah, I think eventually I knew it was going to be a book, but I had to figure it out. And it was really important to me that it not be written as an observer, that I wasn't telling stories that weren't mine to tell. I had to be as involved in it as I needed to be to make it valid.
With a book of poetry, structure is important for the final effect of the book. How much time did you spend on figuring out the order of the poems? You talked a little bit about the sections, the initial sections. Did you do a lot of shuffling and trying things in different orders, or how did that work for you?
I did. Yeah, I did, because I wanted to keep that trajectory of writing down and writing up. So yeah, I moved the poems around quite a bit and had to write more poems for the end section because that was important too. But I always at the same time remembered years ago, I took a creative writing workshop at Sage Hill with Patrick Lane, and he said, people are going to remember specific poems or specific parts of a book, but they're probably not going to go, wow, did she ever have good order to those poems? So, I kind of remember that too. So pay some attention to it, but it's not the most important thing. Yeah.
Now, I always ask any author when they get to the revision editing stage. So at the editing stage, you have a very good editor, Dave Margocious. How did that connection come about? Because he had read it before it came to me at Shadowpaw Press.
He did, yeah. I had submitted the manuscript to the Writers Guild Manuscript Reading Service, and Dave had taken a look at it there, and he didn't suggest too many changes for me. He was pretty happy with the manuscript. So that kind of helped underline for me that it was working. And Dave has edited 4 of my past books, and we just work really well together. He gets what I'm trying to say, and I really appreciate having Dave as an editor always. So I appreciate having him for the door at the end of everything too, because he's been very helpful. And like I say, we just work well together. He understands my voice.
So what are some of the things that a poetry editor, looks at and improves?
He can look for places where perhaps the work is redundant. Sometimes I'll say the same thing twice in a poem, or have another poem that says the same thing, but one poem works better than the other. So he helped me cut a few poems that way, or they weren't just strong enough. So he would help me look at ways of strengthening the poems, maybe finding a sharper ending, that sort of thing.
There were a couple of poems that really struck me because I knew exactly where they had come from. They came from the 2018 when Gerald Hill was Poet Laureate, and he was sending out 2 lines of published poetry every day to members of the Writers Guild with the challenge to either write new poems, either incorporating those lines or responding to them. And I recognized the lines of poetry because, much to my surprise, I wrote a poem every day during that month.
Yes, I know that. That was wonderful.
And I had a few of them in the same collection I think you were in, Berna Barkley's collection that she put out, Line Dance. Mm-hmm. I had a few in there, and then I put out my own collection of everything that I wrote during that month. So I recognize those, and it was very interesting to see. Obviously, I was writing science fiction and fantasy poetry, so what I took out of those lines was very different from what you took out of those lines.
Oh, for sure, yeah. Everybody could do their own take on it. It was a really great exercise, wasn't it?
Yes, it was, and I wonder how. I mean, a lot of poetry came out of that exercise across the province. I know. So
it really did. Yeah. And like you say, everybody took it in whatever direction they needed to go with it. So, yeah, that was great.
Now, as I mentioned, a lot of the poems were previously published. So do you typically submit your poetry as soon as you think it's ready to go? And is there a thriving poetry market across Canada?
It's getting more difficult, I think, to find a home for poetry, I would say, compared to years ago when I first started sending my work out. I go through spurts, I think, when I submit my work, and I'll really get a lot out there, and I'll go, look at me, I'm a writer, I've got all this work sent out there. And then I'll kind of leave it for a bit, because it can take months, of course, or sometimes even years to hear back from some of the literary magazines. But I do still send my work out there fairly regularly. Mm-hmm.
And how did you end up approaching Shadowpaw Press?
Well, because I'd heard about you, and I'd heard what beautiful work you were doing, and that you were maybe sort of stretching your wings a little bit and looking at other ways to publish other writers, because I knew you were doing a lot of fantasy work and sci-fi. But I thought maybe we would make a really good fit. And
Well,
I think we have.
and Dave is on my editorial advisory board, so he's actually
Yes.
a few people in my direction as well. So,
Mhm.
well, I'm very, very pleased with it. Now, the cover art is interesting. It is, you can't tell immediately looking at it, but it is actually a door.
Yes. Yeah, it was taken. I was kind of looking around just to see what might be good as a cover image. Not sure if you'd even want to accept my ideas on a cover, but I came across this. It was a series of doors, a back alley doors that were painted by artists in Regina. And one of them was Marilyn, what's her last name? It slipped my mind now. Marilyn Nelson. And it's called Good to Be Alive Today is her painting. And Good to Be Alive Today. And I read about Marilyn's work, and she's very interested in advocating for people with mental health issues and people on the periphery of society. And the door, it has birds flying up all over it, flying towards the light. I thought, this is absolutely perfect.
Yes,
and
it is.
I was just so happy that Marilyn was okay with using the cover image for the door at the end of everything, because it's appropriate in so many ways.
Well, and just to show you what a small province it is, Marilyn actually knew my mom in Weyburn. So.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah. It is a small. Saskatchewan's a small place. You bet.
Yes, I was very pleased and with the cover, and have had a lot of really good comments on it. And I think it is perfect because it is a door, even if it's not immediately apparent, but we know it. And now more people know it.
Yeah, we know it's a door.
That image of the birds flying up, I thought really fit in well with the theme of the book and with the poems inside it.
Yeah, it really suits it. It certainly does. Yeah.
Now, you've got a couple of book launch events coming up we should mention, because this will come out well before those. So here in Regina on the 19th of September,
That's
having
right.
one at Bushwhackers.
Mm-hmm.
The nice thing about Bushwhacker, and I've had a book launch there before for Gail Smith's book, Thickwood. The nice thing about it is that people can come in and they can order whatever they want off the menu, but they have a nice private room with a sound system and everything. So it actually makes for a really good place for except that you can't have people under 19 aren't allowed in, because they don't let anybody underage in, but it makes for a nice space. And then the next day hopefully I'll be here. We'll be up at McNally Robinson in Saskatoon. You've probably done a lot of launches at McNally Robinson.
I've done a few, yeah, for sure. It's a good venue as well at McNally's on the 20th. And then on the 24th, I'll be doing the Prince Albert launch at the John M. Culliner Library. And then on the 26th, I'm going to be also reading some of the poems from the door at the end of everything at the Prince Albert Arts Hall of Fame Gala. They've asked me to come and read some poems there. And then I'm going to be in North Battleford, I think on the 27th. So I've got some things lined up for sure, and more in the works.
That's good. I love authors who do that, obviously. And we are on YouTube, or at least some people will be watching this on YouTube. There's also an audio version they might be listening to. But if you're on YouTube, there are some videos connected to these poems on YouTube, are there not?
There certainly is. Yeah, it's if you just Google Lynda Monahan YouTube, they come up, and it's a selection of the poems from the door at the end of everything, which was sponsored by the Canadian Council for the Arts. And yeah, if you want to have a listen, that'd be great. There's three segments of poems from the door at the end of everything.
And what are you working on now?
I'm beginning to work on. Just beginning in the very early stages of working on a manuscript of poems that has to do with family, it has to do with my daughter-in-law and illness, and it's a journey of hope. I'm so early on in it that I almost hate to even say what it is because I don't know what it is yet, but it's an exploration. How about that?
Mm-hmm. And where can people keep up with you online for anything that you might be doing?
Let's see. Well, I have an internet address, an email address, and also I'm on Facebook as well. L Monahan at sastel.net. If anybody would like to get hold of me, I'd love to hear from you. And yeah, I'm on Facebook as well.
Well, thanks so much, Lynda, for being on. The book will be out very shortly now. In fact, I'm expecting copies to arrive this week, probably, for both of us. So we'll actually see it in print for the first time. And hopefully those aforementioned typos don't suddenly leap out at us once we have
No, I hope not. But if they do, we will read it a different way.
Yeah. So thanks so much for being on. It was great to chat with you, and I wish you the best of luck as we launch the book into the world, and also with everything that you're working on for the future.
Thanks so much, Ed. We'll see you soon.
And thanks again to Lynda for that conversation. I enjoyed talking to her, and I'm really looking forward to the book coming out. I had enjoyed putting it together. There's another Broadway reference. I have enjoyed putting it together, and it will be out if this podcast goes live when I think it will, in about 2 days from now. So the door at the end of everything. Just a few housekeeping things before I sign off. First of all, you can find the Worldshapers online, and not only on YouTube, but at theworldshapers.com. You can find it on Facebook at The Worldshapers and on X at The Worldshapers. You can find me at edwardwillett.com. You can find me on X at ewillett. You can find me on Instagram at edwardwillettauthor. You can find me on Facebook at edward.willett. I'm also on Threads and on Blue Sky, and you can find me if you look for me. And of course, I am here on YouTube, youtube.com/edwardwillett. You may be watching it on YouTube right now. And if you look up my channel, you'll see, past episodes of the podcast, of course. There's some musical events, including the recent hour-long recital that I did, cabaret, whatever you want to call it, for my 65th birthday, which just passed. And you can also walk with me around Regina in my Walking in Regina series of videos. Not quite every day, but pretty close. I take some sort of walk, long or short, here in my home city of Regina, Saskatchewan. Shadowpaw Press, which has been mentioned many times because this was a Shadowpaw Press title, as well as me being the publisher of Shadowpaw Press, can be found at shadowpawpress.com. You can find it on X at Shadowpaw Press and on Instagram at Shadowpaw Press. All right, that's it for this episode of The Worldshapers. I am going to continue to talk to some of the authors that I have been publishing over the next little while. So it will be Shadowpaw Press authors coming up for the next bit, and then we'll see after that. But I hope you will come back and continue to enjoy these conversations with authors about their latest books. That's it for this time. Bye for now.